What you can see right now is a breakdown of the different issues they touched upon throughout the debate. I'm not going to read them to you because you can read them for yourself. Don't want to bore you. So yeah, I'm just going to start showing clips and giving my reaction to those clips. Overall, I think Piers had the better of the debate. I think Mehdi was deflecting a lot. I think he was changing and modifying the issues that were being debated to keep Piers off balance. And I think a lot of his points were ignoring the other side completely. I think they were a little biased, so that's going to be how those comments are going to go. However, when the conversation switched to Trump and Springfield, it appears that Mehdi got the clear upper hand in that portion of the debate. And so I'm going to show you how that happened as well. So yeah, Piers got the upper hand on Israel, and Mehdi really got him good on the Trump and Springfield comments. Okay, let's get started.
Great to meet you. Always enjoy our debates, which they are. Let's start with what's happening in Lebanon, because we may find some areas of agreement here, I suspect. But first of all, Hezbollah. Do you see a distinction between Hezbollah and, say, Hamas?
In what sense?
In what they are, what they represent, how they have acted.
I mean, they're very different groups. They operate in different places, in different contexts. I guess what they have in common is that they both came out of Israel's occupation of their lands, right? Hamas comes out of the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and many people are not aware of the fact that Israel occupied Lebanon, southern Lebanon, for 18 years, from 1982 to 2000 when they withdrew, although the Lebanese argue that there's still an occupation of a piece of Lebanese land called the Sheba Farms. So in that sense, they're similar. They're obviously different in some of their tactics. They're different religions. Well, they're different sects, I apologize, not different. They're both Muslim, but one is Shia, one is Sunni. They're both backed by Iran. I mean, look, there's similarities, differences. I think what's really interesting this time round is we've seen for a year Israel killing thousands of civilians in Gaza and saying, well, Hamas is to blame because of human shields, because of tunnels. That argument just does not work in Lebanon. They've killed 550 people, Piers, on Monday. An insane amount of people in a single day, one of the highest single-day death tolls in modern warfare. Almost all of them civilians, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry, which is not Hezbollah, by the way. You know, they always say Hamas-controlled health ministry in Gaza. So I think what we've seen is so phenomenally bad on Israel's end and so little defense. You know, October 7th was used, as you and I have discussed before, as the excuse for killing tens of thousands of Palestinians.
Well, I would categorize it differently. I don't think they use it as an excuse to go and kill tens of thousands of Palestinians. They responded to one of the most egregious terror attacks of modern times.
But when does the response end? We're nearly a year in.
Well, that's the question. That is the question.
Well, that's when it becomes an excuse. When you carry on killing and killing.
Is it an excuse, or is it that they are wedded to the elimination of Hamas because Hamas has persistently said, we want to keep doing the same thing over and over again? And there's a correlation with Hezbollah, whose charter is very explicit. They stand for the eradication of Israel. I mean, that's what they're about.
That doesn't justify killing 500 people in a single day.
I didn't say it did, but
that's what bothers me. That's what happened this week. That's the big story. Hezbollah's charter is irrelevant to what we're talking about. That's not why.
Okay, so you saw that clip, right? So Mehdi points out that both Hamas and Hezbollah are Islamic organizations, albeit they are different sects of Islam. Hamas is Sunni, while Hezbollah is Shiite. Mehdi makes the point that both were born as a result of Israel's occupation of Muslim lands, which is a reasonable position. I won't dispute that. If Israel never existed, I doubt Hamas or Hezbollah would ever form. But we have Israel, and they're here, so we have to deal with them, right? We gotta make peace somehow. Mehdi mentions both are backed by Iran. Now, immediately after saying this, Mehdi shifts his answer from answering Piers' question about comparing Hamas and Hezbollah and immediately jumps into attacking Israel. He goes right away into attack mode. And he says, unlike in Gaza, Israel doesn't have what he calls a cover. What he means is justification. He's referring to October 7th. And basically the implication is clear, and that means that the world should come down far harder than it did on Israel regarding Gaza in Lebanon, because with Hezbollah, Mehdi's position is that Israel has zero justification for going after Hezbollah. Now, this is simply false. It's just not true. Everyone knows that beginning October 8th, Hezbollah immediately began firing rockets at Israel, and they claimed that they were doing this in solidarity with their Hamas Palestinian brothers. Now, Hezbollah continuously has fired rockets and missiles into Israel over the past year, lobbing well over 10,000 rockets and missiles into Israel in total. This has led to the displacement of as many as 100,000 Israelis from northern Israel who are no longer living in their homes, no longer leading their normal lives, and their kids are no longer attending school. So Mehdi's argument that Israel has no justification whatsoever for attacking Hezbollah is simply wrong. So Piers, catches on to this and says, well, wait a second, Mehdi, hold on. Isn't Israel just defending itself from Hezbollah, just like Hamas, who's an organization that share genocidal ideologies? Don't they both exist to, in fact, destroy Israel? And what's Mehdi's response? Mehdi's response is the ideology doesn't matter. His exact words are, their ideology is irrelevant. Okay, so Mehdi's already started to say some pretty outrageous stuff, saying that their ideologies is irrelevant. It's not just a misstatement, a small one, it's an enormous misstatement. You can't ignore any party's ideology when you're talking about war. Ideology is what drives people to do what they're doing, and when they're engaged in war, they are heavily being motivated by their ideology. It's going to control what they're going to do, it's going to control how they're going to respond, and it's going to inform you on how to deal with them. How do you get to peace? You have to understand where these people are coming from. So to say ideology is irrelevant, well, that's pretty weak stuff by Mehdi. So the question is, what are Hamas and Hezbollah ideology? Where are they coming from, right? How do we know what these ideologies are? Well, one way to know is to read their founding documents. Hamas created a charter in 1988, and they set forth their goals and aspirations and hopes, basically a summation of their ideology very clearly for anyone who wants to know what it is. They can give it a read. As you can see on your screen, Hamas's charter quotes directly from an Islamic hadith, and a hadith is like the rules that govern how Muslims live and what they do, how to act, so on and so forth. And this specific hadith is very clear, and it says, the time will come when the Muslims go to war with the Jews, and the rocks and the trees will say to every Muslim, "Oh Muslim, look behind me, oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come now and kill him." And the hadith says all the trees will say this except for the Garquad tree, and the Garquad tree won't say this because it happens to be a Jewish tree. Okay, I guess we have religious trees. Anyways, what else does the charter say? The charter says that Jews and Israelis, by virtue of being Jewish, are in direct defiance of Islam, in defiance of Muslim people. It also says very clearly that Israel will not exist. Israel will continue to exist only up until the point where Islam eliminates it. And it said, how is it going to be eliminated? It says, well, all Muslims, all Islamic states, all Arab nations, they have to dedicate their strengths and efforts to one thing, and that one thing is to destroy Israel and to murder all the Jews. It's pretty clear. So what does the charter say about peaceful negotiations, right? Because that's the focus of this debate is how to get to peace. I think that's everybody's central question, right? That's the sine qua non. How do we get to peace? And what does the Hamas charter say about peace? Well, the Hamas charter says about peace is there is going to be no peace with the Jews or with Israel. It says the only solution is through jihad, through violence, through the gun, and that there will be no peaceful negotiations. And in fact, if you read the details of the charter, it says if you try to make peace with Israel, you're going to burn in hell. So, that's their ideology. It's an extreme ideology, and you have to understand what it is and to come to terms with it in order to figure out how to reach a solution here. Now, Hezbollah's ideology, to save some time, I don't want to bore you. It's pretty much the same as Hamas, and the reason being is that both Hamas and Hezbollah are just arms of Iran. They were created by Iran, and they exist to fulfill Khomeini's objective, his objective in life. It was his father's it was Ali Khomeini's objective in 1980 when he came into power, and it's Khomeini's ideology today, and that ideology is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Now, I say it's Khomeini's ideology because it's not the ideology of the Iranian people. Iranian people are far different than their regime, and in fact, most Iranians support Israel, which most people have no idea about, and that's a topic for a whole other video, but that's a really interesting thing. The people of Iran are very upset with Khomeini and the regime, and they're yearning for freedoms that Western civilization offers. Okay, so it makes sense that Mehdi doesn't want to even touch ideology with a 10-foot pole, the ideology of Hamas or Hezbollah, because then his entire argument would literally disintegrate like a house of cards. Mehdi's position is that if Israel puts down its weapons and grants all the Arabs of the region equal rights, then everybody will live in peace and harmony. Big kumbaya, live and let live. Everybody will just get along, and it'll be a nice, peaceful utopia. But if you take into consideration Hamas and Hezbollah ideology, you know that this isn't the case. You know that if Israel puts down their weapons and grants equal rights, the fact is they'll be blown off the face of the earth tomorrow. So you have to look at ideology, and Mehdi's assertion otherwise is insincere at best. Okay, let's move on to the next clip.
And Gaza and Lebanon would argue parts of Lebanon. This is the problem, right? The core of the problem is Israel's territorial expansionism.
It's a mess.
Attacks, not a mess. It's Israel occupying multiple Arab lands, which leads to quote-unquote resistance or quote-unquote terrorism, whichever word. I don't care what word you want to use right now, but that is the core, right? You had John Mearsheimer on the show this week, made the same point. Deal with the occupation, then you deal with the violence. And look, has Hezbollah fired into Israel at civilian targets? Yes, I don't agree with that. But the reality is 82% of the exchange of fire between Lebanon and Israel since October the 7th has been done by Israel.
Okay.
82%.
But here's
is that not a provocation of
Let
Hezbollah?
me finish my point, which is that since October the 8th, 19,000 missiles, rockets have come from Hezbollah to Israel, right?
But way more from Israel into Lebanon.
Well, I'm sure.
82%.
Of course they've responded. What else are they supposed to do?
82%.
But
this is not two equal sides.
So they can't defend themselves.
But the vast majority of attacks is on Lebanon.
Okay, but would you condemn the firing of rockets by Hezbollah or not?
Of course, I condemn all attacks on civilian targets. We know that, Piers. We've discussed this.
I'm going to come to Israel's response.
I don't come on shows to defend militant groups or foreign governments.
Okay. So
I come on shows to say, let's end the violence.
Yeah.
Let's sort out what the solution is.
Yeah.
Let's look at the root cause of the violence. It is undeniable that the root cause of the violence is Israel, Israel's occupation, the genocide in Gaza. What did the leader of Hezbollah say? He said, we won't fire any rockets if you end the killing in Gaza. What did the president of Iran say? We won't retaliate for what you did to Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil if you end the killing in Gaza. What did the Houthis say? We'll stop blocking ships if you end the killing in Gaza. Where do all roads lead back to?
Why would you believe any of those people?
I don't believe any of them. I'm Ronald Reagan.
You're citing them as if they're sort of gospel statements from people who have unimpeachable.
I'll tell you why, if you let me finish. I'm Ronald Reagan.
A bunch of terrorists said, we won't do X, Y, Z if you do this.
I'm Ronald Reagan. I say verify. Call their bluff. If they're lying, call their bluff. Stop the Gaza fighting and then see what happens.
Yeah, but Israel has called Hamas's bluff.
When?
There was a ceasefire in place before October the 7th.
That's not true.
Well, it is true.
That's not true.
Well, it is true.
It's fundamentally false. They were attacking Palestinians the week before October the 7th. In September, you can Google it on that tablet. What's your definition of a ceasefire?
Well,
Israel gets to attack people and not the other way around.
Okay.
In September, you just made a charge that's not true. There's a tablet there, you can Google it. Guardian headline right there, you can go see the news report.
I don't Google during interviews.
Well, afterwards everyone can.
Well, you heard it from Mehdi himself. He's not here to defend militant groups. But is he? I don't know exactly. Let's take a look at Mehdi's arguments to see if he's really being a neutral arbiter and has no dog in this fight, or if something else might be going on. First off, Mehdi places the totality of the blame for all the violence squarely upon Israel's shoulders. Not half, not 60, not 70, 80, 90. No, he places all the blame on Israel's shoulders. He doesn't even blame Hamas for the atrocities and horrors of October 7th. Okay, so Mehdi's not blaming Hamas or Hezbollah or even Iran for anything that's going on right now in this war. So I'd ask you guys, is that being neutral? I don't know. It sounds a bit fishy to me because, after all, we're talking about not one, but two registered terrorist organizations in Hamas and Hezbollah. So to not find any blame at all with either of these two terrorist organizations, while claiming at the same time to be not defending terrorists, doesn't really pass the sniff test. At least it doesn't pass my sniff test. It might pass your sniff test, and if so, leave it in the comments below. I'd love to hear. I mean, how does it sound? How does it sound? Ask yourself. This is what Mehdi is saying. I'm not defending terrorist organizations, but at the same time, I don't blame either of these terrorist organizations for what's going on today with Israel, for why this war is happening in the Middle East. Okay, that's what he's saying. I don't know. It sounds a little bit off. It sounds a little bit silly to me, but you might think otherwise, and that's perfectly fine. Just leave it in the comments. Mehdi's next argument is that the root of the violence is Israel is an occupying state. They're an occupation state. And that the way of framing that alone to me doesn't sound entirely neutral, not 100% neutral. Because when he says Israel is an occupation state, well, he's being a little overgeneral. He's being a little vague. He's not specifying which portions of the land are legally deemed occupied. What he's doing is he's painting a picture in your mind, the viewer's mind, and that picture is that Israel in its entirety is an occupation state, and its existence is it's occupying Arab land wherever it exists. And at least Mehdi knows that's not true, because Mehdi knows what the ICJ and the UN have said on this issue, right? So what did the ICJ specifically say about Israel? Well, it said that Israel's certain settlements are in fact illegal, and those illegal settlements are occupation. They are an occupation. So specifically they said settlements in the West Bank, some of the settlements in East Jerusalem, those are unlawful, and those are tantamount to being occupations in those areas. What else did the ICJ say? The ICJ has said that Israel is illegally occupying the Gaza Strip. Now, to some degree this is arguably true, but it's a little less straightforward. And the reason it's a little less straightforward is because Israel actually withdrew its troops back in 2006 entirely from the Gaza Strip, as well as forcefully destroying all of the Israeli settlements within and around Gaza, and forcefully moved out all the people from the land. They had to actually arrest the Israelis and move them out, and that's what they did. But what Israel has done, which can't be questioned, is it has maintained a large degree of control over much of Gaza's border. Not all of it, but much. And it does control what goes in and what comes out of Gaza as far as products, utilities, and even water. But what people don't know about Gaza, and this is kind of important, is that Egypt, not Israel, but Egypt has been in control of the entire southern border of Gaza, the Rafah area and the Rafah crossing. That's controlled by Egypt, not Israel. So if you want to condemn Israel for occupying the Gaza Strip, you have to also condemn Egypt equally, because they're regulating everything that comes in and out of the Gaza Strip on the southern border of Gaza. Actually, back in 2013, it was Egypt that first flooded Hamas's tunnels going in and out of the Gaza Strip, and it did that to, for internal security and to prevent Hamas from infiltrating into Egypt and bringing with it its extreme ideology. So I'm not by any means disputing the illegality of some of Israel's settlements under international law. There's just no debate. The ICJ has ruled on it, so those things can't be disputed. But my point is that Mehdi uses intentionally imprecise, overgeneral language when he says Israel is an occupation state, and I think Mehdi does this to support an underlying thesis that he has. And that underlying thesis, which he hasn't made clear yet, is that Israel, as an occupation state, has no right to defend himself and equally has no right to exist. And this is what I think Mehdi's central thesis is, and it does come out later on. He hasn't said it yet, but he will. And when he does, I will point it out to you. I won't let it slide by. And if Mehdi came out and honestly said, "Hey guys, I'm going to advocate on behalf of the Arab position here. I'm going to tell you why the Arab argument is the correct argument and why the Israeli argument is a false argument." But he doesn't say that. No, he doesn't say he's advocating for. He says he's a neutral arbiter, and he's simply weighing the evidence and coming to the only logical, rational decisions. How he says, "Oh, these are the facts. I only use the facts, and I'm just a neutral. I'm just being neutral here, and I have no biases." But I think that's insincere and disingenuous. Actually, I don't think Mehdi should be going around billing himself as a neutral arbiter, somebody who really wants a two-state solution. Because even though he says he's for a two-state solution with equal rights for Arabs and Israelis and Jews, I think what Mehdi truly would prefer, and I could be wrong, but I think what Mehdi truly would prefer is if Israel ceased to exist. But Mehdi's a smart guy, and he knows that if he came out and said that, well, he'd lose complete credibility. He knows that nobody would take him seriously again if he said, "I don't believe Israel has the right to exist." But if you look at his arguments, you really look closely at his arguments, that's what he is advocating on behalf of. Anyway, those are my personal gripes with Mehdi, but let's move on to some of his other arguments. Okay, so Mehdi's next argument that Israel is at the root of all the violence in Lebanon is that he says it many times, is that Israel has fired 82% more munitions at Hezbollah than Hezbollah has fired into Israel. He really likes that number 82%. When he says it numerous times to Piers, and every time he says 82%, he has this silly little grin on his face, smeared across his face, 82%. As if he's won the argument. He's won some type 82%. Of award. He wants a cookie or something. I don't know. He says 82%, and the argument's over. 82%. Now, I'm not saying he's incorrect in that. 82%. He very well could be correct that 82% is the correct number for how many more munitions Israel is firing into southern Lebanon than Hezbollah is firing back at Israel. But let me be clear about something, and everybody should understand this. Even if Israel fired, 500% more munitions into southern Lebanon than Hezbollah fired back at it, that doesn't make Israel the aggressor. Or as Mehdi likes to say, the provocateur, the bad guys. He's saying Israel are the bad guys here because of that number, 82%. And I don't need to tell anybody what happened in World War II. 82%. The U.S. and the Allies dropped, exponentially more munitions on Hitler's Nazi Germany than Nazi Germany did against U.S. and the Allies. Everybody knows the terrifying number of German civilians who were killed in that war, which paints an inaccurate picture of what's died. A million civilians, non-military people, 1 million people, Germans, died during World War II. But you never hear anyone, even the Germans, argue that the U.S. and the Allies were the aggressor and the provocateur in World War II, based on that percentage of munitions fired by the Allies, because, well, that's an absurd argument. It's simply absurd. And that's what Mehdi's mathematical argument is. It's a simply absurd argument. The percentage 82%. Of munitions fired by the respective sides of a conflict don't determine who the aggressor is by any stretch of the imagination. So Mehdi's mathematical argument, is weak. Very weak. And just ask yourself, why would Israel want to provoke Hezbollah into an all-out war when they're already heavily engaged in Gaza? Opening up multiple fronts in any war by any army dilutes that country's military power. And when you dilute your military power, you have a higher chance of losing. Going back to World War II, just ask Nazi Germany if it was a good idea to open up the war on the Russian front and to invade Russia during the wintertime. That was a bad idea. You had a lot of generals during World War II telling Hitler not to do these kind of things. Rommel, the great tank general, Rommel, he told Hitler, don't do this, you're going to lose the war. What was Hitler's response? Does anybody know? What did Hitler do to Rommel for speaking up and saying, don't do what you're doing, don't expand the war, the fronts? Well, Hitler gave him two options. He said, I'm going to kill you and not your entire family, or you can kill yourself right now. And Rommel, being a brave soldier, he killed himself. Anyways, that's getting off topic. Let's get back to Mehdi and Piers, right? So Mehdi's argument is that Israel is the aggressor with Hezbollah. So it makes no sense for Israel to want to, provoke Hezbollah into some type of all-out war. What do they have to gain by opening another front? I don't see it. If you know why Israel would want to provoke Hezbollah into a regional war with multiple fronts and you have the answer, please leave it in the comments. I'd love to learn something new. So Piers, what does Piers do? He points out that, hey Mehdi, Hezbollah has been continuously firing rockets, thousands of rockets into Israel. I've heard numbers as high as 19,000. I'm not sure on the exact number, but I am sure it has displaced 60, 70, 80, as many as 100,000 Israelis from northern Israel, and that the rockets have been flying steadily every day since October 8th, and that was not provoked from Israel. In fact, Nasrallah himself announced on October 8th that he's firing rockets into Israel in solidarity with Hamas. Now, does Israel want to destroy Hezbollah? Of course they do. Of course they do. But under the rules of war, that's a completely legitimate objective when you're faced with a belligerent enemy, belligerent being, somebody using violence and the tools of war to kill you. It's perfectly reasonable to want to destroy that opponent. And you can do that so long as your acts are proportional to the means, and the means proportional to the ends, and the ends are survival and destroying your enemy. So the means can be somewhat severe, so long as you're not needlessly killing excessive amounts of civilians, destroying excessive amounts of civilian infrastructure, and the number of bad guys, combatants being killed is within reason. What's within reason? You have to look at civilian to combatant death ratios throughout the various wars to get an idea of that. But if you look at the previous wars, like for example Iraq, the civilian to death casualty ratio was super high. They found out after they went in and found all the dead bodies under the rubble that as high as 75-80% of the deaths were in fact civilians. And if you look at the civilian to death ratio, at least in Gaza, it's not even that high. It's much less in Gaza than it was in Iraq, just to put it in perspective. And Piers points this out to Mehdi, right? He says, he tries to point this out to Mehdi, but Mehdi just cuts him off and says, 82%, Piers, 82%. Israel are the aggressors,
2%.
They're the bad guys, 82%.
82%.
So as we can look at Mehdi's arguments that he advances, they kind of coincide with this underlying thesis, which he hasn't quite yet clarified. He'll do it later on. He'll clarify it, and I'll point that out to you when he does. But his thesis is that Israel is an occupation state, and occupation states don't have the right to defend themselves and don't have the rights to exist. Okay, so what's Mehdi's next argument to support his position that Israel is the aggressor and the provocateur with Hezbollah? And he does so by using the promises and representations made by Hamas, made by Hezbollah, made by the Houthis, and made by Iran. He says, and Nasrallah did come out and say that Hezbollah would stop firing rockets if Israel withdrew from Gaza. He cites Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, who also claimed that Israel wouldn't retaliate for Israel's assassination against Haniya if Israel withdrew from Gaza. Now we know at this time, actually, that Iran did retaliate for Haniya, but that's neither here nor there. Mehdi also cites the Houthis, who said they're going to stop attacking shipping in the Red Sea if Israel withdraws from Gaza. Now, it doesn't take a shrewd debater, as some would say a master debater, to see that Mehdi is advancing a very weak argument here. For the simple reason, it's based on the promises of untrustworthy individuals, to put it mildly. These are people who are registered terrorists as far as Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis go. And as far as Iran and Khamenei goes, Iran created these terrorist groups for a specific reason, right? To destroy Israel. That's the specific purpose for which they exist to do. So if you've ever studied logic, and I took, I think, an intro to logic class about 100 years ago. I would call this type of, they gave you a bunch of fallacies, right? I'd call this a pseudo-appeal to authority. And I call it a pseudo-appeal to authority because these are pseudo-authorities, right? These are not reliable, honest, moral authorities. You're not quoting, Abe Lincoln or George Washington or John F. Kennedy. You're not quoting good authorities, in my opinion. So that's what Mehdi's engaged in at this point. He's engaged in logical fallacies, and logical fallacies are not a good thing to do to support your argument with, in my opinion. If you disagree, leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. And you gotta know, about Hezbollah and Hamas and Houthis. They were all literally created by Iran, by Ruhollah Khomeini, many, many decades ago, 40 years ago and whatnot, 30 years ago. And so they shared the exact objective that Iran, Khomeini, but their exact objective is, and that is to destroy Israel. They share the same ideologies, almost literally verbatim. So what does Piers do at this point? He calls out, he says, wait a second, Mehdi, you're basing your argument on the words of some pretty violent, bad dudes, some bad hombres. I hear that a lot going around the YouTube. There are certain people, they refer to people as bad hombres. I don't mean to be racist in any way. I think it's amusing. Bad hombres. Almost like an old Western. Anyway, so Mehdi got pushed into a corner at this point, because he is quoting some bad dudes, right? So he fires back and says, well, I don't believe anybody. I don't believe anybody. I'm Ronald Reagan, Mehdi says. I'm Ronald Reagan. I say verify. So what is Mehdi referring to when he's saying I'm Ronald Reagan, I verify? What he's referring to is what Reagan said during the Cold War with dealing with Russia. And what he said was, well, I'm going to trust them, but I'm going to verify what they're saying to see if what they're saying is the truth. Meaning he'd give Russia the benefit of the doubt first, but then check behind the scenes, verify that what they're saying they're doing and what's happening is actually going on. And this was pretty clever of Reagan because the quote is actually an old Russian proverb. Well, not that old, relatively old Russian proverb. And that was kind of a way to tell the Russians without telling them exactly that he was a student of their culture, that he was listening and studying them as a people. And that was pretty shrewd of Reagan. He was a shrewd operator, Reagan. So Mehdi tells Piers, at least while he was still sane, which he stopped being towards the end, but that's neither here nor there. So Mehdi tells Piers, Israel did call their bluff. They did have many ceasefires throughout the years, and anyway, so this argument that Mehdi's advancing to call their bluff, it's slightly disingenuous because they have. That's what I'm trying to say. They have called their bluff. So to say Israel hasn't called their bluff and entered into peace agreements is ahistorical. It's not what's happened. There's been a number of peace agreements. Trust and verify in this context isn't a solid argument because Israel has trusted and they verified that what Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran has told them isn't the truth. It isn't the truth. So they have no reason to continue trusting them. There's no reason to trust these people if you're Israel. Somebody could lie to you so many times, and if you just keep on believing their lies, that's not going to work out well for you in the end, ever, in any situation. And I'd argue that Israel would need to have their head checks to believe Hassan Nasrallah, Yahya Sinwar, and Ali Khamenei about anything they say. Anything. If Israel was to believe, take these people at their words, I'd argue Israel would have to have their heads checked out. That would be a suicidal thing to do. But if you disagree, leave it in the comments. And I'd argue that Mehdi probably doesn't even know who is attributed with originating that Russian proverb that Reagan famously said during the Cold War. Because if he did, he might have thought twice before using it because it's a doozy. It's a doozy. And I'm going to tell you, big reveal. Who said it? Who said trust and verify? What famous Russian leader said trust and verify? If anybody knows, leave it in the comments. Okay, I'm going to tell you who it was. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, Prime Minister of Russia. Back in the day, he was ruling Russia between the 30s and 50s throughout World War II. He happened to murder about 2 million Jews. It's a big debate whether or not Stalin was in fact an anti-Semite. The majority of historians are unanimous in accusing him of being an anti-Semite based on what he did. He led countless pogroms. He killed Jewish politicians. He killed Jewish poets. He killed Jewish doctors. In fact, he actually had a very anti-Semitic program about to begin in 1952 called the Doctor's Plot. You guys can look that up on your own. Doctor's Plot. Everybody's agreed the Doctor's Plot was, almost like Hitler's final solution, but it didn't get off the ground because, as we know, Stalin died in 53, so there was no Doctor's Plot. Anyways, that's who said that. I don't think Mehdi would have used a proverb by Stalin if he knew it was from Stalin, especially in the context of a war between Arabs, Muslims, and Jews. But he did. He did. He absolutely did. Anyway, so Piers pushed back on Mehdi and points out that Israel had a ceasefire with Hamas. They withdrew in 2006. They pulled out all the agents, and Mehdi fires back. He says, that's not true. He says Israel did violate the ceasefire agreement. Now, so Mehdi claims to never be justifying violence committed against Jews, right? He says, I'm not here to justify anything that Hamas and Hezbollah has done. But if you listen to what he's saying, that's exactly what he's engaged in doing. He's justifying the acts of October 7th on the basis that it was Israel that violated the ceasefire agreement in September, the month before October 7th. So what they did was okay. It's all Israel's fault. And Piers didn't really know what he was talking about, so Mehdi says, "Oh, go ahead and Google it. You can Google the article in the Guardian. Go ahead and Google it." And he knows Piers isn't gonna Google anything in the middle of an interview. But guess what I did, guys? Can you think what I did? Absolutely right. I Googled it. I Googled the article from the Guardian from September, the month before October 7th, and I read it. I read it from top to bottom. And does anybody know what that article says? Probably not, unless you've looked it up like I did. So I'm going to tell you what it says. The article says that back in September, there was a large number of Gazans who, in protest of what Israel was doing by controlling things going in and out along the border of Gaza, not that they were inside regulating because they were outside along the border, but they were regulating stuff that was happening. So what did the Gazans do? A couple hundred of them got together. They assembled countless numbers of Molotov cocktails, which are, basically fire bombs. And they got, a lot of these rocks, and they got their slingshots, these rubber type band devices where they sling these rocks over their head and then launch them at 1,000,000 miles per hour at the Israeli troops. And they threw the Molotov cocktails, causing countless conflagrations. So you have, there's pictures of it, and it looks like, hell on earth. There's fires everywhere. There's, Gazans slinging rocks. And so what do you expect? What do you expect the IDF to do in that situation? If you don't think a rock can kill you, tell your friend to pick up a big stone, walk 15 feet away, and have him throw about 20 as hard as they can right at your head. Rocks can kill you. That was putting at risk IDF soldiers' lives. And so, big surprise, the IDF soldiers responded. What did they do? They shot 4 or 5 Palestinians, Gazans, in their ankles. Was that nice? Was that a nice thing to do, shooting them in their ankles? That wasn't a nice thing to do. Was it justifiable? I'd argue 100%. If you want to try to use deadly violence against a military and you get shot in the ankle, don't complain about it. I don't want to hear it. Don't complain about it. No. You can protest, but when you take that to the level of deadly violence and violence is returned upon you, you have no moral high ground. You've lost it. It's all gone. And that's what made Gandhi so great, He was able to win through peaceful protest. That's what makes Gandhi Gandhi and Sinwar a bloody terrorist. and Haniya a bloody terrorist, and Nasrallah bloody terrorist. Don't believe what these people are saying. These people were Gandhi. These people were Martin Luther King. These people were Malcolm X. This is bullshit. Sorry for my French. This is 100% unadulterated bullshit. Okay. But moving on. So the article from September from The Guardian doesn't make Mehdi's argument that solid, doesn't make it solid at all. It's very weak because it doesn't show that Israel violated the ceasefire agreement. It showed that a couple IDF soldiers were protecting themselves from lethal force by firing into 4 or 5 Gazans' ankles. So yeah. Those are Mehdi's arguments in that portion. Let's move on to the next section and see what these debaters have to say. Okay, so because this video is running a bit long, I'm going to cut it off here. I'm going to make this the first part, and I'm going to finish off the video in a second part, but I'll make sure to make the arguments much more concise, a whole lot shorter, and hopefully I'll get through the rest of the Piers versus Mehdi debate in the next one. So please come back and check it out. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Be safe out there.